This is the general government interim study on permanent standard time. Kind of what I'm hoping to present to everybody is, some of the legal facts and as well as what I believe are benefits for standard time. But we'll get into quite a bit of the legality of it with the Uniform Time Act that was passed by Congress back in 1966. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Gentry, who will be presenting online, and let Dr. Jeffery Gentry do his presentation. Dr. Gentry, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a real pleasure, and I thank you so much for providing this interim study. I am speaking as a private citizen and not for my employer. Until 6 years ago, I spent the prime of my life in the great state of Oklahoma. 13 years at SWOSU in Weatherford and another 13 at RSU in Claremore. My highest degree is from OU Norman, and my 3 adult children earned degrees or certificates there in the city. I'm sorry I can't be with you at the Capitol today, and I'd hoped to see my grandson's coach pitch game last night in Edmond, but at least they pulled out a win. Mr. Chairman, this is the most nonpartisan issue there is, and today's interim study is literally about life and death. My team's research, published in the journal Time and Society last year, found that more people die in auto accidents when they live in misaligned time zones. Over 12 years of data, we found a 22% higher vehicle fatality rate where clock time is disconnected from natural time. That's more than 1,000 excess deaths per year across the country. The pattern held across all 4 principal U.S. time zones. This interdisciplinary research provides strong support for chronobiology theory, which links circadian sleep deficits with a host of maladies and premature death. The problem is called social jet lag. It isn't just about the total hours we sleep, but when those hours take place in relation to the sun's movement. Legislators need to be aware of this basic physiological need. Mr. Chairman, road fatalities are just the latest hazard to be linked to artificial time. My colleagues on the panel know them better than I. Circadian misalignment is associated with higher risks of stroke, heart disease, obesity, dementia, and cancer. Even worse than misaligned time zones, daylight saving time creates an additional circadian deficit of a full hour for 8 months of the year, right there in Oklahoma. DST, daylight saving time, is the worst insult to human sleep timing that modern life has produced. Natural time is superior to artificial time. Daylight saving time is unnecessary. We spring forward precisely when the days are growing longer already. DST adds not a single minute of light to the day. And to those who would defend the status quo, I have 3 points. First, the harmful effects of daylight saving time are not temporary, not just during the spring transition, as some would have you believe, but for 2/3 of the year. DST creates a chronic circadian misalignment. Studies in chronobiology and neurology, which is Dr. Karin Johnson's field, expose DST as a serious threat to the health and safety of human beings. Second, during DST, Oklahoma clocks say noon when the sun is directly over Philadelphia. Think about that. The American Medical Association, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, which Dr. Johnson is a member of, and the American College of Chest Physicians, which my daughter is a member of, are all on record for natural, not artificial time zones. Third, daylight saving time was drawn up a half-century ago by bureaucrats with no understanding of circadian science. We are the guinea pigs in this failed experiment. The promised energy savings are not supported by research, and the bonus of extra leisure time in the evening, a dividend for the wealthy, comes at the expense of bleary-eyed mornings. To conclude, the preponderance of research drives the final nail in the coffin of the case for daylight saving time. Everyone who has actually studied the issue comes to the same conclusion. Yes, we should end clock change, but we need to do it the right way. The great state of Oklahoma should adopt permanent standard time. Your citizens will be healthier and safer because of what you can accomplish. Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to speak today. I will continue to monitor the interim study until I have to go to class in about 40 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gentry. At this time, does anybody have any questions for Dr. Gentry? We would entertain any questions. Seeing none, we will go to Mr. JP. He is the president and founder of Save Standard Time. Mr. P., you are recognized for your presentation.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for those attending and those watching on recording afterward. My name is JP. I'm the founder and president of Save Standard Time. We are a 501c4 nonprofit working for the public benefit. I'm also by trade a software engineer, by hobby an amateur astronomer, and by family a great-grandson of Iowa farmers. And I mention that because that really did factor into my decision to go work on this issue. My great-grandfather, when I was a child, I was blessed enough to know him, taught me to tell the time from where the sun is positioned in the sky. That is the solar time, the natural time. And standard time is an approximation of that solar time, whereas daylight saving time is a falsification, a turning of the clock forward to create an illusion of more daylight. So I wanted to give a little bit of history of the time here in Oklahoma. And I should be clicking the right button to go forward, yeah?
This is what, yeah, I did. I tested it earlier and it was working.
Do we have a spare, perhaps?
We don't, but I can move it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, you just let me know and I'll move it for you.
Okay. Yeah, please to the next slide. Okay, yeah, the history one. Okay, so from the beginning of time, we told the time from where the sun is in the sky. Even here in Oklahoma and in Europe, from where many of our ancestors came. In 1883, railroads necessitated a move to standard time because with solar time, cities are going to be a few minutes off from each other. So standard time standardized the solar time, and we went with that for a good long time. In World War I, we invented daylight saving time, the theory being that if we wake people up earlier, they would go to bed earlier, and that would be good for the war effort. There was really no data behind it, but that's what we did for a year, and then we went back to permanent standard time. During World War II, we tried permanent daylight time, where it was not just in the summer, but a year-round turning of the clock forward. That was not popular, and as soon as we reestablished peace, we went back to permanent standard time. Now, in the 1960s, several large cities, New York, Chicago, LA, started to talk about bringing back daylight saving time. They thought it would be good for business. It would create this illusion of daylight after work and stimulate shopping. It spread from the large cities to the East Coast states, and it started to cause a confusion across the nation, and that's when Congress got involved. In 1966, they passed the Uniform Time Act, which said all the states need to go to DST in the summer and then fall back to standard time in the winter unless you exempt yourselves. So in the 1960s, Oklahoma was a standard time state. And your predecessors worked with Nebraska and Texas and South Dakota and tried to resist this effort from Congress. Unfortunately, they were not successful, and that has been the law of the land ever since. This flip-flop of clocks. With the exception of 1974 and the oil crisis, President Nixon urged Congress to put us on permanent DST. It was supposed to last for 2 years, but it was starting to cost lives. Children were being struck by motorists who were not getting enough sleep on these dark morning roads. There was a huge public backlash, and the program was revoked later that same year. And so we went back to our flip-flop status that we're still on today. Next slide, please. I can do it. Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to bring up a point of local pride for you, perhaps. Oklahoma State University has a lovely sundial on the Henry Bellman Research Center. So if that's your alma mater, go check it out. Just a little diagram of how this solar time works. When the sun is at the highest point in the sky, that is your 12 noon, and we divide the hours between there. Now, this is spring and autumn when things are very balanced. You see people might be waking up at 6 with the sunrise and going to bed with the sunset at 6. Now, in the summer, there's a lot more daylight because we're tilted toward the sun, and in the winter, there's a lot less because we're tilted away from the sun. And nothing we legislate can change this physical fact. With standard time, we divide the globe sort of like slices of an orange. And you can see Oklahoma is on the western edge of the central time zone. Now on the right, if the sun is over the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, where Greenwich Mean Time is, it's 12 noon there. And over here on the right in the central time zone, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. And it's this beautiful geometric balance that I just love. It's just sort of like if Bugs Bunny were to dig a tunnel to the other side of the earth, it'd be the opposite time of day on the other side of the earth too. Now here's a close-up on the United States of how those time zones work out. The brown solid line is where the central time zone should end, but for social and economic reasons, the boundary has been pushed a little bit to the west, which is not ideal, but it's practical. With daylight saving time, we arbitrarily renumber those hours. Oh, and I'd be glad to email you these slides too, sir. With daylight saving time, we renumber the hours. And what that does is in the summertime, you got people getting up a little bit earlier in the morning. If we did this in the winter, though, you'd see we'd be sending people to school or work in the dark. So that's why we don't do daylight saving time in the summer. It renumbers the hours and it misaligns the clocks. This is a photograph from Tulsa, Oklahoma, just a few days ago. You can see that's the full moon on the left, by the way. Right now, we are observing daylight saving time. So it's central daylight time, it's 6:30, and it is completely dark outside. I come from Iowa, but I live in Phoenix, Arizona. And when I get up naturally without an alarm clock at 6 in the morning, the sun is just now rising, and it feels fine. But if I were here in Oklahoma or if I were back home in Iowa, I'd be needing an alarm clock to get up and waking up in the dark. And then I'd be sleeping in later on the weekend, and your circadian rhythm gets out of shift with this sleeping in and waking up early, and it's tiresome. Living in Arizona with permanent standard time, I wake up with the sun, I don't need an alarm, and I just feel healthy and clear-headed. Now, if you were to extend daylight saving time into the winter, it'd be completely dark until 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, if I had kids to get ready to go to school and I were driving half an hour, I'd be probably getting up at 6. I'd be getting up 2.5, because the sun wouldn't rise actually until 8:30. In the Panhandle, the sun wouldn't rise until 9 in the morning. I'd have to set my alarm clock and wake up 2 hours, 3 hours before the sunrise. And I don't think any constituents are asking the government to set their alarm clocks that early, but that's what permanent daylight saving time would do. And to be sure, these photographs are from Quanah, Texas, but that is just 8 miles south of Jackson County. It's the closest I could find, and I promise to get you some from actually Oklahoma very soon. This is a map to show you. Up top is with standard time, and to be clear, Oklahoma is on Central Standard Time currently in the winter. There are some proposals for permanent daylight time, so that would put you on Central Daylight Time in the winter, and this is how it would change your sunrise times on the bottom map. And again, I'm glad to share these by email with anyone who'd like, and I think we might be able to distribute a print copy of this map as well. So in 1974, I mentioned we tried permanent daylight time for the oil crisis, and it quickly did not go well. These are all news articles from Oklahoma from 1974. We have several children that are injured on the way to school. I think even one of them says 2 children were killed. We have many letters to the editor, people complaining about this, and it also disrupted business, particularly road construction, because you want to work on your construction work. If you're working outdoors, if you're a farmer as well, you usually want to work in the morning, first light, when it's not so hot outside. If the sun doesn't come up until 9 in the morning, you can't start work until 8 or 9 or even 10, and now you're overlapping with the rush hour, and they're losing valuable work hours. So there were complaints about that as well. Your predecessors in the Oklahoma State Legislature and members of Congress were fighting this, were asking for exemptions from the permanent daylight law, trying to get together a pact with local states, something I always encourage. And so just some more history there. Currently, there are a lot of people talking about ending the clock change. Usually the people who want to end it with standard time care about health, about safety, about education. There's also some for religious rights, certain churches and other religions wanting to be on the natural time. The people asking for permanent daylight time usually are golf associations wanting more time to play golf after work. And to that I would say, if you're going to play golf after work, maybe you could just start your own work day an hour earlier instead of tricking the clock and making everybody else do it too. This is the current law of the land, the Uniform Time Act of 1966 passed by Congress. Up top, the first half of it says that you need to change your clocks forward and backward on the same dates as everybody else, otherwise it would be confusing. The second half of it says if you don't want to change your clock, that's fine, but you need to stay on standard time. And so those are your legal options. If you were to pass a law for permanent daylight time, it's federally prohibited. But if you're to pass a law for exemption from daylight saving time to restore permanent standard time, that is approved. You can go forward with it. That's what Arizona does. That's what Hawaii does. That's what all 5 U.S. territories do. A state law, if you want, could have a delay, a postponement of taking effect until Texas or Arkansas. Take your pick. If you have concerns for cities on the border, you could always tie the effective date to neighboring states, but I do recommend trying to go to permanent standard time as soon as you practically can. And that's what I have to say. I'd be glad to answer any questions right now or at the end with everybody. And coming up, we have here Mr. Robert Scott, who is a local to Oklahoma that we've invited to speak, and on the phone, we got Dr. Karin Johnson, a sleep doctor. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Mr. P? No questions?
I don't have any. I thought we might be able to print them and hand them out, but I'd be glad to give you my card and I can email you any materials.
All right. At this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Robert Scott. He is an aerospace engineer. And Mr. Scott, you are recognized for your presentation.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's an honor to speak here and give my observations of how the time has affected me over the course of my 42 years. I have a short slide here, and hopefully it'll just keep me on topic. If I like to interact, so if anybody wants to interrupt me, I'm perfectly fine with it. I don't mind answering questions, and that way I'm not just sitting here rambling. But anyway, let's get on with who I am. I'm Robert Scott, and I reside in Beggs, Oklahoma, and that's the highlighted county right there, Okmulgee County, just south of Tulsa. I'm a third-generation Oklahoma. My great-grandfather was a dairy farmer just outside of Stillwater, and I come from a line of dairy farmers. My grandfather was. My father was a dairy farmer up until about 89, and he was also a roughneck. So he did it all. Let's see. I have a wife and 5 children. I've been married for 16 years, and I can't actually speak a whole lot to kids standing outside in the dark because we homeschool our children. However, I do have family that has their kids in the school system, and it is definitely a topic that I have experienced just in the news. When the time changed, believe we pushed more daylight savings. We furthered daylight savings around 2004, sometime around. I can't remember the exact time frame, but I do recall, accident. If you are aware of it and you look for it, you'll start hearing those news reports of kids getting injured waiting for the bus in the dark, and the news really doesn't seem to make that connection. But if you're aware of and you pay attention to this daylight and its relation to the sun, you'll pick up on that. And let's see. I am I have a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering. I'm an aerospace engineer, and I've done that for almost 20 years now. But I'm also a part-time farmer, and that's just part of. No matter how much my father wanted me get out of farming, it's just, unfortunately, you can take the boy off the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the boy, I guess, if I would say that. So I put the part-time in quotation because I'm pretty sure we all put more than 40 hours a week into part-time farming. It's definitely long hours, and we do it because we enjoy it. So that's me. And why am I here? And the reason I'm here is just because over the years I've seen a lot of claims made in regards to benefits to daylight savings, and I want to talk about my experience in regards to daylight savings versus standard time, and try to convey those observations the best I can. And I do recall in my youth, because my father was an advocate for permanent standard time, being, he worked by the sun. So anybody that works by the sun's schedule can realize, right, exactly. And that's the alarm they have a lot of the times. But see, I like interruptions. It's very helpful. It breaks up the monotony. But anyway, no, he... No, let's see here. Oh yeah. In my youth, it made sense when you don't think about it. It's like, hey, an extra hour of daylight in the evening in December. That sounds great. But actually, over time, I started to develop an understanding that this one little seemingly benefit has a tremendous impact over the whole year and everything, and how it affects our life, especially with our families. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But I can say one of the greatest impacts I've had in supporting permanent standard time is understanding solar noon, and that just being God's time. You know, when the solar noon is the point at which the sun is directly over your head when it's transitioning from the east to the west, and right now that's on how standard time is set up. As Jay mentioned, for Oklahoma, it seems, in my opinion, it seems to be set at Chicago. We're pretty close to Chicago, so by the time you get from Chicago to Tulsa, you're pretty much solar noon is noon on our watches, maybe a few minutes after that. Whereas as solar noon during daylight savings time is 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then as you move out to the west towards the Panhandle, you're looking at 1:30, 1:45 time frame. All right, so talking about my work schedule, and I mentioned that when you're kind of in a corporate office, you don't really. It's not obvious the effects of daylight and the changes and how subtle they are. But we all know when we change the time and you crash into it, you have this groggy feeling. I would experience it for weeks, so I don't want to get too long into the time change. I think everybody agrees changing the times twice a year is an atrocious. So, but I will get into some of the impacts of how the daylight savings affects me and how it affects the work productivity. But I've been fortunate enough that I've actually kind of set my own schedule over the years, and I actually do. I work 6 a.m. During standard time, and then when daylight saving time hits, I generally adjust my schedule up to 7 a.m., and I keep that for quite a while. I may slowly work my way back to 6 a.m., but most of the time I'm closer to 7 a.m. So, so Jay mentioned golfing, and I thought that was kind of interesting because I'm not a golfer, but I don't know. I work with golfers in the office, and the interesting thing, I don't think I've ever seen a golfer going out golfing in December or leaving work early in December to go out and golf in the freezing cold weather. So I don't know. That's about all I can speak to for golfing. But I know for daylight savings during the summer months, they're normally leaving the office early anyway, so they can get a full 18 in. So I don't know how much moving the sun an hour really helps for the golf industry. But I did want to speak a little bit about farming and the impact that I've seen from the daylight savings actually during the summer, and it affects you on both ends. And a lot of it affects you during the summer because, like if you're cutting hay for your cattle for the winter, you have to wait. You have to wait until 11 or noon. You have to wait for the dew to burn off. So no matter where the clock is, if it was you can't change. So if it was on standard time, I could get out earlier. I could be out at 10, and I could maybe get done. And then the nice thing is when you're working on cutting your hay all summer and the time you put into it, usually you get in late. And if you're getting in around 10 o'clock, you're missing time with your family, and it puts you out later at night. So also I wanted to comment on I know most of the people I've talked to on the farming side, they want that hour in the evening because they think it's going to be a lot lighter in the middle of December while they're putting hay out and feeding their cattle. And I can tell you, it takes a long time to do your nightly chores. And, moving the sunset from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., you're still going to be working in the dark. There's just no way around it. Or you'll have to leave. You leave your job early if you're a part-time farmer. And so you have 9 hours and 45 minutes of daylight in December and 14 and a half hours in June. And there's just no other way to cut it. So here in Oklahoma. So my last wanted to touch on is just my leisure events. And this kind of was my eye-opener for me. And that had to do with a lot of the summer camping, your summer fishing trips. A lot of us, we're creatures of our environment, and no matter where the clock is, you want to beat the heat. We're not getting out on the lake at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because the sun's out there. So during the summer, you're pushing that off until later, and that's been my experience because it pushes you. Anytime you're out fishing or camping, you're trying to beat the heat. You go out later to fish. It gets you in later. It's just less time with your family. You're cramming it all in at the end of at the end of the day, and you end up going to bed 10:30 at night. You cram. By the time you clean your fish and get it in the freezer, and you're cramming food in your mouth and trying to go to bed, and then then think about the impacts to productivity. I know you get in late, and then now you've got to be back at work in the morning, so you're tired and you're groggy, and so. In the summertime right now on daylight savings, we're near 9 o'clock for sunset. I mean, it's pretty close to that. So my last comment, which was a huge eye-opener, which I love to tell this story, was family. We took a trip to Europe, and we ended up in Madrid for a couple of days. And I tell people that desire that that winter daylight savings to spend some time in Madrid, because they are about 2 hours from solar noon in October, and that's when we were there. And it's actually horrible. We were up. Their sun comes up about 9 a.m., 8:30, 9 a.m. In October, and it was funny because we got there. And we woke up the next morning. I get up usually around 6. My wife's up at 7, and we're kind of sitting there getting ready to go out and see the town. And we're sitting there in this tiny hotel room, twiddling our thumbs, waiting for the sun to come up. So and I think that has a lot to do with why you hear these old stories of the 70s, where there's huge support for daylight savings. Permanently year-round, and then when people actually get to live it, there's a massive drop in support, and I think that's what you'll see in this country if daylight savings is passed year-round. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of my slide. I do talk to everybody I encounter. I typically mention it. I think anybody that talks about it, we'll say just pick one and stick with it without fully understanding the trade-offs. And I guess my last comment is there's a reason we haven't gone 100% daylight savings, and the reason we inch towards it, and it's because they're trying. There's this want to condition the public for daylight savings, but in the end, I think you'll find that. You won't be able to settle on that. And if I have a little bit of time, okay. If I have a little bit of time, I didn't get this out for Jay in time, but I thought this was kind of funny. This is a news article that my dad kept from 1986. It was the Tulsa Tribune, and he was on the front page talking about he was one of the 11 dairy farmers in Tulsa County, talking about impacts of permanent daylight savings in his world. And I actually just found that article. I went to my parents' house over the weekend and finally tore their house apart looking for it. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. but I was able to find it, and I wanted to bring it here and just share it. And what I thought was what was comical about it is some of the comments he makes in his support of permanent standard time are some of the comments that some of the facts that I've come to realize over my life. And, when you talk to your father and you have this realization and you think you're the only one that's ever experienced this, and he gives you a little smirk because he's been dealing with this, for his whole life. So that pretty much is all I have to say. And again, thank you for allowing me to speak here. I hope I've had some impact. I hope maybe I've maybe provided some education or observation that you didn't see or understand. So again, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Are there any questions for Representative Banning? You are recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scott, thank you for being here as a constituent in which I serve. It means a lot that you are here and involved and, telling these stories. And I just wanted to, with you and your family, the remarkable, perfect family is what I see in the homeschooling. Your kids are amazing. And for your involvement to be here, I just wanted to thank you personally.
Thank you.
All right. If there are no further questions, we will move to Dr. Karin Johnson, who is going to be presenting online. Dr. Johnson is a professor of neurology and director of the Baystate Health Regional Sleep Program at the University of Massachusetts Chan Medical School in Baystate. So, Dr. Johnson, you are recognized.
Thank you. And thank you, Representative West, and everyone who else is taking time today to learn about this issue. So I too am not here on behalf of my employer, but I am representing the Coalition for Permanent Standard Time, which is a collaboration of the American Sleep Medicine, American Society of Sleep Medicine, the Sleep Research Society, the National Sleep Foundation, the Society for Research on Biological Rhythms, and Save Standard Time. And those organizations, represent over 10,000 sleep medicine physicians and researchers. And I come to this, I'm essentially a clinician. I'm basically, see patients every day with sleep trouble. I see the impact that these sleep problems have on people's lives. And, I just get the joy every day when I can fix some sleep problem and suddenly someone can work better, enjoy their family life better. And so I have disorders I can treat like sleep apnea and narcolepsy. But standard time is something I can't treat as a doctor, but you can as legislators. And so a few years ago, I got interested in this topic and really thought this is a way I can make an impact in millions of people's lives if we can get out the right education and knowledge. And this is, science that has really grown and exploded. Our understanding of circadian rhythms of sleep is just, growing and growing. And this last year, the American Heart Association just labeled sleep as one of the pillars of heart health. So we see, these associations, the American Academy of Neurology, again, pointing to sleep as a real sort of pillar of brain health. And so I think if we can improve people's sleep and beyond, again, the amount of sleep they're getting, but their rhythm of their sleep, their circadian rhythms, we can make a big difference. So I hope today to sort of present to you some of the data that's actually out there, is why these organizations have come out endorsing permanent standard time is really the best for health, for safety, and for overall prosperity. And it really comes down to sort of two issues about daylight savings time. The one that's more clear to most people is the switching of the clocks. We feel that change in the spring. We feel the sleep loss that a lot of people get. we hear stories that there's increased risks of heart attacks and strokes and car accidents, and people miss their appointments, and more suicides and depression. We hear about these stories, and a lot of us can feel it ourselves and want to end those clock changes. Most polls show about 70% of Americans in favor of ending clock change. But what I want to talk about more is what I consider the hidden harms of daylight savings time. And it's been alluded to by some of the other speakers, but these are really the harms of living in daylight savings time, living on that artificial, shifted, and delayed time. And what we have learned, especially in the last years, about what this is doing to us. And I call it a hidden harm because a lot of people don't blame their insomnia or their heart disease or their difficulty losing weight on daylight savings time. And it's not the only factor causing those disorders, but for some people, it is a pretty sizable factor. And there are certain populations that are at more risk of these harms. And what a lot of people also sort of confuse in their mind is right now, we essentially do daylight savings time during summer, and we do standard time during winter. So a lot of people think daylight savings time is good. That's summer. I love summer. It feels good. Oh, I don't like winter. Standard time must be bad. I would argue it's the opposite. Standard time makes the winter bearable, and we could have even better summers if we were on standard time. Sorry, give me my sec. My computer just closed out on me. Sorry about that. Little computer glitch. So, we really need to separate out the difference between the longer days, the warmer weather, and what time we're choosing. And this really comes down to circadian rhythms. So our bodies align to the time of the sun. It doesn't matter what time our phone is showing, what time our watch is showing, we stay aligned to the sun. So when we're off by an hour with daylight savings time, or even more when we're on the western end of the time zone, our bodies have a delay there. And so essentially what our circadian rhythms are supposed to do is help us anticipate the day. It's supposed to say, you should be going to sleep now, so I'm going to help you get tired. You should be waking up now, so I'm going to help get you more alert. You should be eating now. I'm going to help you digest and not have irritable bowel syndrome or other digestive problems. I'm going to help you be alert so you can drive safely, so you can make good decisions, so you can be really productive at work. And so when that is off, we start misaligning those activities. We want to be, asleep when our schedule is telling us we must drive. We need to be at that early morning meeting when our body still wants us in bed. And so that misalignment basically puts a constant stress on our body, and that affects our health overall. And so we have a few studies that we call natural experiments, places that have been on standard time, went to daylight savings time, for example, in Indiana. Russia actually spent a few years trying permanent daylight savings time, and it was so unpopular that afterwards they reverted to permanent standard time. So we have some data from some places where we can look at that direct difference. But the data that we use otherwise to help understand what is the effect of those later sunrises and sunsets are some like what Dr. Gentry and his group did. And so they take advantage of the fact that there's parts of the time zone that are more aligned, and then the western edges that are more misaligned. And essentially, for a lot of those places, there's about an hour difference, or we can look at sort of how far off from where a place is supposed to be in terms of the solar time. And for every 5 degrees, that's 20 minutes of clock time off. We can see what is that impact on outcomes. And this type of data is what really lets us find out what is the sort of real effect of those time changes, and not just what is the effect of summer or other aspects. And so we have data on sleep. we have that working adults lose about 19 minutes on average when the sun sets or an hour later. Now that increases. If you have to be up by 7 a.m. in the morning, you lose about 36 minutes of sleep. If you're a working parent, a non-working parent, but have to get your kids up by 8 a.m., you lose about 27 minutes of sleep. Now, if you're lucky enough to be able to sleep in until after 8:30, you don't really lose sleep. Now that we have data out of Russia, again, when they were able to look exactly at being on daylight savings time all year round versus standard time, and they found that children, adolescents, were much more likely to have that social jet lag that Dr. Gentry mentioned. So sleeping in much later on weekends and getting sleep deprived on weekdays. So even though their average sleep time was still okay, this unevenness, this misalignment that they had between weekends and weekdays increased considerably. And we know that people and kids with social jet lag have worse mood, do worse in school, have more issues with substance abuse, with a lot of sort of negative outcomes. And so health-wise, again, by looking at sort of the east to the west ends of time zones, we see worsenings in obesity. We see about 10% higher rates of cancer. We see up to like 20% higher in heart attacks and other heart disease. We see increases in diabetes. And one study looked at some of these health problems and it estimated millions of dollars of extra healthcare expenses that we spend just because of the later sunrises and sunsets. Now, mental health is also really important. And mental health and depression especially have some of the closest links to circadian rhythms. And we have lots of data that link these things. And again, we see people who have later sleep timings, people who have more social jet lag, having more depression. But when we actually look at the data, so again, in Russia, when they were on permanent daylight savings time for 3 years, they had the highest rates of seasonal depression in adolescents. And when they switched to permanent standard time, the rates were the lowest, even lower than on seasonal daylight savings time. So while some people may think, oh, I get out of work, I get a little bit more light, I get to do a little bit more after work, that does not translate to less depression. Another new study that just came out this year looked at suicides. They found in northern states, there was an extra 2 per 100,000 suicides that occurred, in southern states 1 per 100,000 more. If you take that over kind of the current levels, that's about 5,000 extra suicides per year that can be attributed to later sunrises and sunsets. So this has real mental health effects, and we can really improve that. We also see effects on substance abuse. We know that when people's brains aren't working as well, when there's more circadian misalignment, that we see more substance abuse issues. I want to touch on activity. A lot of people have made arguments that will be more active if it's later sun, sets, and that will then be good for our heart health, for our obesity health. And we just don't find that. There was a study that looked at 23,000 children in 9 different countries. And in the US, they found no significant increase in exercise levels overall. There was some increase in other areas like Northern Europe and Australia. And in some places that were warmer actually showed a decrease in exercise levels when the sun was out later. So how hot it is, and what the weather is has almost more effect on whether or not people will exercise. Essentially, some people move their exercise from the night to the morning, but if you were going to exercise, you still did anyways. And even if we did see some people exercising more, we still have this data showing that there's about 10% or more risk for obesity when the sun sets are later. I want to move on as a neurologist. One of the issues that I think is not talked enough is how our brains are working when we don't sleep well. I'm sure a lot of you have felt this. If you don't sleep well the next morning, you're feeling groggier, you may have a harder time focusing in a meeting or work. And this is what is happening. And that has the safety aspects that Dr. Gentry talked about in terms of car crashes. We see it in workplace injuries that increase when there's circadian and sleep problems. We see it in people deciding to use more substances like alcohol and drugs. And then we see it in work productivity. We have a lot more people showing up late to work. We have a lot more people being absent from work. And this has been shown in studies and really impacting economic outcomes overall. And also, if more people have health problems, they're also going to be out of work. And so when we think about businesses, we talked earlier about golf industry. There are industries that do, especially in the spring and fall, may get a little bump in business because of that later light and people essentially giving up their sleep to go out and do things like shop or recreate. Now, those effects are going to be most in the spring and fall. Once it gets longer days in the summer, colder days in the winter, those heat factors, those weather factors, aren't necessarily helping that. But while we think about the economy as a whole, it's important not to think just about sort of certain niche businesses. It's important to think about the workers. And so most workers have work start times before 8 a.m. Those disproportionately fall on lower income workers. It disproportionately falls on minority workers. And these are the ones that are going to lose the most sleep and have the most circadian misalignment and get the most health risks. So we can really benefit the majority of workers. We mentioned construction workers, transportation workers, farmers, all these people that need to get up and be at their jobs, being productive. Those are the ones that we are really helping. And hopefully, if we can have them be more productive, they can, have just as much time to enjoy with their families after work. I do, on that sort of disparity note, I do want to talk about the other populations that are affected the most by daylight savings time. So again, anyone that has to get up before about 8 a.m. are going to be most affected. And then anyone whose natural rhythm already starts with a sort of delay. The main group of that is teenagers. And so these are our kids. They're at the prime of their life when they're trying to learn, when they're trying to grow, when they're making decisions about whether they get into drugs, alcohol, when they're getting on the road and driving. They're the ones that are going to be the most impacted by this and lose the most sleep. And so if we can get them that sleep they need, we can keep their schedules more even. We know that they can be more successful in life, which again has long-term economic benefits as those students do better overall. And then parents. I'm a parent of 2 kids, and I have to help get my kids up, to get out the door in the morning, and that becomes very hard when you're doing that in the pitch dark. And we've already heard about the risks of kids standing out at the bus stops in the morning, and what especially happens in the winter, because Oklahoma is more on the western border. There is almost 3.5, 4 months of it being dark after 8 a.m. if we were to go to permanent daylight savings time. So I hope I've sort of given you some of the data. I did submit a sort of handout with some of the sort of more statistics of this data. And so if anyone wants more of the actual numbers, I can give it. I do want to make one other study that I like to bring up. Indiana looked at 10 years of data of students taking SAT scores. And so most of the state before 2007 was on permanent standard time, but the edges were on permanent daylight savings time. And they found that the students that were living on seasonal daylight savings time had 23 points 16 points lower average SAT scores, but it was 49 points lower if they were lowest income, 23 points lower if they're middle income, and 8 points lower if they were highest income. So everyone was worse, but again, just highlighting how some people are really affected the most. And we really want to, do this public health change to really help these people get, their best their best chance at life. And so by aligning with the sun, we can really use that power of the sun to get us in alignment, to make our lives easier, and to make us all healthier and safer.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. Are there any questions for Dr. Johnson? Representative Deck, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing this study to our attention and bringing this topic up. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for presenting today, and to all the other presenters. I'm very appreciative of the attention to public health with this issue, but I have a couple of questions regarding that. First, I want to say, as a professional musician, no one hates Spring Forward more than my industry does. You play in a bar until 1 a.m. on Saturday night. You lose the hour and you wake up at 6 a.m. in order to prepare for a Sunday service that you may also be working at as well. But I kind of wanted to get, and it's maybe a slight shift from the main topic here, and I apologize, ask for a little bit of leniency on that. But I also have a lot of experience with shift work. And since we have a sleep expert here on the call, I'm kind of curious on, whether it was working in the oil field, as a floor hand on a rig, or working in a manufacturing plant, I've often been told when I'm going to come to work and when I'm going to leave. That's my normal experience in the workforce. And so, is there anything that you can kind of add to that, or speak on as far as how some of the workday implications are affecting people's or general public health as well?
So, shift work is essentially causing circadian misalignment in people. And we know that it's associated with higher rates of cancer, heart disease, obesity. So for the same reasons that daylight savings bad, shift work can be bad. Now, the most common shift work schedule is an early morning start. So starting at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m. Is the most common schedule. And so those shifts are going to be the ones that are certainly impacted more by daylight savings time, because essentially whatever time it is, you're kind of tricking yourself into going and even an hour earlier. And as hard as it is to go into work at 6 a.m., it's even harder to go in at 5 a.m. And it's particularly hard, as you mentioned, with when you can't fall asleep early enough at night. And that's what the daylight savings time does. When the light is out later, it shifts us even later. So we might say, okay, I got to be up at 2 a.m. I really should be going to bed at 8 p.m., but you just can't. Your body's rhythm is saying that's when you should be at your prime alertness and doing well. But because of that shift, because of that circadian rhythm, you just can't force yourself to go to bed, even though that's when you need to get that adequate amount of sleep.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Johnson? Seeing none. Mr. P, did you have some more that you wanted to add, kind of follow up on some of what we've heard?
Well, I could honestly talk about this all day. I think I covered all my points, but if there's any questions, I know this can be a confusing topic because it's time, and you can't really put your hands on time. So I can't fault anybody, and it's easy to get mixed up on east, west, morning, evening, all these polarities as well. So I'm glad to answer any questions on the details.
Yeah, Representative Deck, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. P, for being here and for your presentation. If we were going to propose, kind of sounds like the general ask here, Mr. Chairman, is for the possibility of Oklahoma receiving kind of a deference to setting its own time. Is that correct? Would that
Well, that is one of the things on the table. I had a bill last year that I wound up not moving, and then I had one the year before that we actually voted on and passed on the House. The Senate didn't take up and that was to go to standard time. Last year, the Senate advanced a bill over to the House to go to permanent daylight saving time. So really what I just wanted to have this kind of a study so that we could have the conversation so that everybody could make an informed decision, because there is a lot of confusion over, half of the people, if you walk into a Walmart right now and you say, are we on standard time or daylight saving time? They go, I'm not really sure. So I just wanted to kind of bring some of that information to light, have a conversation, and that way everybody is well informed as we move forward.
Follow up?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. P, since you've obviously done a great amount of research on this, what are some of the potential economic impacts, particularly if Oklahoma was to be on its own or be on permanent standard time or even permanent daylight savings time? Effectively, I guess we would have a different time than Texas or Kansas, or what do we know about the potential economic impact there?
Well, yeah, so it's a funny situation how permanent daylight time is federally prohibited, but permanent standard time is federally permitted. So Oklahoma could pass a bill for permanent daylight time, and you could not put it into effect. You would need Congress to change the law, and we're not seeing much movement out of Congress. Thankfully, yes, on this issue. Maybe not so thankfully on other issues. But if you were to pass a law for permanent standard time, you could put it into effect right away. And so that makes it a little more like a little more powerful arrow in your quiver there. If there is concern for commerce on the borders, maybe you're near Fort Smith or Wichita Falls. That's why I do mention that many states put forward bills that say we would delay the effectiveness until the neighboring state of Texas or Arkansas were to take the same effect. And we do see a lot of support for permanent standard times coming out of Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas lately. So if you felt that it was more practical to have a successful execution, passage and rollout by delaying it to be effective with neighboring states, that's something you could choose to do. I must say that the health science says that we should do it right away. So you need to weigh that balance when you decide what to do.
And I'll add just a little bit to that. The bill that I had year before last would have put it to a vote of the people if they wanted that or not. But in talking to members, the very first version of that was that we would just do it. And there was a lot of hesitancy toward just doing it, mainly because of our border states, this, that, and another. So it was presented to me at that time, we might be able to pass something that was a trigger based on pick a number of border states, or to do it as a vote of the people. So that I chose at that time the vote of the people. I felt like that might be the easiest that we could get all the way to the governor. The Senate did not agree on that. So most likely what I'll do, if I do introduce some legislation, I'll do it, with a couple of our border states doing it as well. Now, as far as the direct, I can speak just a little bit. It was a long time ago, but I lived in Phoenix, Arizona in the late 80s. And, of course, Arizona is on permanent standard time. And California still changes their clocks. New Mexico changes their clocks. Utah, Nevada change their clocks. And really didn't see much of an impact. The biggest impact for me personally on that was whenever I was calling my family back here in Oklahoma, trying to decide, are we 1 hour different or 2 hour different, But other than that, it really wasn't a major deal. Now, of course, having said that, Phoenix, Arizona is pretty much in the middle of the state, and I totally get, if you're close to Fort Smith or Wichita Falls, where that could be a major hurdle in some cases. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and I think Gary, Indiana is on Central Time specifically because of the commute. It's a sort of commuter community. And thank you. And I've got one follow-up for you, if you don't mind. Could you speak to, this is only things I've heard anecdotally, but, there have been, apparently there was a conversation about potential energy savings with daylight. Is that still the case? What's the historical context there?
Yes, thank you for that question. So once again, daylight saving time was invented in the early 20th century. At first, it was proposed as a way to play more golf, literally. And it was laughed. That's absurd. Change the clock, play more golf. Just play golf. But when the war came around, then they said, well, maybe it'll make people go to bed early if we wake them up early. And then if people don't stay up late at night running their lights, it'll save energy for the war. There was never any data behind that. And as data has come out, we find that it's not true. And it may even waste more energy. So again, with daylight saving time, we turn the clock forward. We get to leave work an hour early, which is nice. But then you got to get up and go to work an hour early the next day. And you're waking up earlier in the dark, and it's cold, you're running your lights and your heat, and that consumes a lot more energy than any energy savings from the lights. Lights are a more efficient use of energy. And also now in the modern world, we've got computers running 24/7, so it doesn't make much a dent, honestly.
Representative Maynard. Oh, you have something?
Just there's a couple of studies that have looked specifically at residential utility bills, and so in Indiana, they found when they ended standard time that residential utility bills, primarily because more heating and more air conditioning, went up by about 1%. When they switched to seasonal daylight savings time. And that, again, potentially is even more when you have to do more heating in the middle of the winter with permanent daylight savings time. Another study by J.P. Morgan found they compared Arizona to Los Angeles. So Arizona staying on standard time, and they found Los Angeles, when the daylight savings time switched, they ended up spending about 5% more on utility bills, on gas bills, and on healthcare bills. We are taking money out of people's pockets, according to these studies.
Very interesting. Representative Maynard, do you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to kind of know how many states are currently on permanent standard time, and then the second part of that question would also be, have any done it recently? What was the transition like? Kind of how did they walk that out?
Thank you for that question. So again, the federal law permits any state to exempt itself from daylight saving time, and the definition of a state includes territories and the District of Columbia. Presently, only 2 states and all 5 territories exempt themselves, I might say ourselves because I live in one of those states, from daylight saving time. We haven't seen any state attempt this in the 21st century, and as I go around talking to legislators around the country, that's because most of them don't realize that it's an option. It's kind of buried away in the federal law. Many people think that Arizona's got some kind of special permission, but that's not the case. So we haven't seen a recent attempt at this. This is a resurgence. The last conversation we had over this was in the 1970s with the oil crisis, mainly.
I can add just a little bit to that. When the Uniform Time Act was passed, Arizona specifically chose not to participate. And then when Hawaii came on, I believe that they made the same decision. Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that there is a part of Indiana that exempts because the time zone cuts through there. And I know that there have been, since I started running this, I know that there are at least 5 other states that during that same time frame over the last 3 to 4 years have, at least introduced legislation. Some of them have passed one chamber or the other. None of them have made it all the way to the governor at this point. For follow-up.
So my second question would be, out of the then 2 states and the 5 provinces that do stay on permanent standard time, do we have the studies to show that we have markedly better health outcomes? Because one of the problems we have in Oklahoma is, honestly, our health outcomes in Oklahoma are lower than many areas of the country. So I would love to hear from any of you of just kind of what are the health outcomes shown for the areas that have chosen the permanent standard time.
I'll comment briefly first, and then I'll check in with the doctors on the line. But to my knowledge, there's not been strictly a study of the health of Arizona and Hawaii versus the other 48. There have been studies of when nations have attempted permanent daylight time, which Russia did between 2011 and 2014, and then they put it to permanent standard time because they were finding an increase in automobile accidents and in depression, and I think poor performance in school. Also, when we look at the differences in time zones, and this was the expertise from Dr. Jeff Gentry, I think he had to go with his schedule. I don't see him on the line anymore, but he was studying the western edge versus the eastern edge and finding that here on the western edge, where the sun is already coming up later than it does in St. Louis, that you're finding more automobile accidents, more depression, worse performance in schools. I think as high as 20% more fatal accidents, which is not something to take lightly. Dr. Johnson, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, there aren't any current studies that I know about looking specifically like Arizona to another state in terms of health outcomes. One issue you get with especially a state like Arizona is there's a lot of people that have moved from other places. So if they've, had, issues from being in New York for most of their life and now moved to Arizona. So I think that's limited some of the analysis. So that position and time zone type of data is sort of the best we have for most of the health outcomes, other than, as he mentioned, like the little data we have out of places like Russia that did those actual real full year experiments.
Are there any other questions? Well, I have just a couple of things that I would like to wrap this up with. Kind of like I said at the beginning, I wanted to show some of the health side because that's a huge part of it. But then I also wanted to bring in the legality. We deal with making laws and everything every day. And I'm actually old enough that I remember when we did this in 1974, when we went to permanent daylight saving time year round, and the backlash. It was great when they very first did it, and then that winter came, and it was 8:30 before the sun come up, and kids are standing at the bus stop, this, that, and another. So one of the things that I handed out to you, and I've got all of this is an article that was written when Oklahoma legislature passed a resolution asking Congress to repeal permanent daylight saving time because of the hardships that it was causing to Oklahomans. And like I said, I want to make this clear because whenever I get to talking to people, I've even talked to people much older than myself. They're like, we've never done permanent daylight saving time. We forget because probably one of the reasons was it was for such a short period of time. Like has been put out, the Uniform Time Act of 1966 mandates that we use daylight saving time, but it does allow for us to opt out of that and stay on standard time. So I believe it was Dr. Johnson mentioned, that this is something that about 70 to 75% of people want to lock the clock. Now you start digging in, do you want to go here or here? That's where you get the big difference. But with the way that it is set, several states have passed permanent daylight saving time, and the federal government has not approved them to do that. There's currently one piece of legislation federally that would address this, and that's called the Sunshine Protection Act. And the Senate passed that by unanimous consent. The House has not taken it up. I believe that was about a year and a half ago, ballpark. If that were to go into effect, that would automatically put everybody on daylight saving time. And then states would, and that would be year round, then states would have the choice if they wanted to comply with that or if they wanted to go to standard time. So, when we're having these conversations, sometimes in the course of just a brief conversation in an office or a committee hearing, you don't get to really dig into some of that. And these were some of the things that I really wanted to point out. I do have a copy of the actual resolution that the state of Oklahoma passed in '74, detailing, the reasons for this. And best I remember, it was pretty much the central time zone was the one that was pushing back the hardest on this because we were affected the most by it. I know several of you I've talked to over the years. I have a granddaughter that lives in Little Rock, and we FaceTime with each other most nights. And it's amazing to me, it'll be 8:30 and I could still be outside doing yard work and looking outside her window in Little Rock, 300 miles away, it's dark, So that kind of gives you an idea, even within those time zones, that there's a big difference, So those were some of the things that I just wanted to bring to light in this. And, like I said, wherever you happen to be on this issue, I just wanted to bring some actual facts and legally what we can and cannot do so that as we move forward, everybody's able to make informed decisions, because I think that every piece of legislation that we pass or don't pass in this building affects all Oklahomans. And, the better informed we are, the better decisions we're able to make on that. And with that, I would entertain last opportunity for any questions, comments, anything. Seeing none, I want to thank our presenters, especially Mr. P has been just absolutely phenomenal. We've had several changes of dates due to the special session. He has been super flexible, and I want to thank. I'll say it. Hopefully, he'll come back and watch it. Dr. Gentry for his presentation, Dr. Johnson, and then Mr. Scott. Thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us. And I want to thank the committee members for coming and listening to this. And hopefully, as we move forward, if you have any questions, feel free to come to me. I can help get you connected with any of these people if there's some technical questions that you think of later. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much.